Okay, here's our opportunity to pull together what we have learned so far. What do we know? We know that breastfeeding is best and that breastfeeding success is influenced by all the significant others in a mother's life. What we don't know, however, is how a teaching intervention that's aimed at significant others will influence breastfeeding. This is also known as a knowledge gap, which is a research problem. Okay, so let's go to the literature and review the benefits of breastfeeding, the incidence of breastfeeding among teens, because we're going to look at teens now for this study. We're going to look at past interventions that have been done to try and increase the incidence of breastfeeding among teens, and how the attitudes of significant others can influence the entire process. The literature review is going to tell us about all these things we just looked at. It's going to tell us about knowledge and values about breastfeeding and benefits and all of that. And from that, for this particular research study, we're going to come up with a conceptual framework. This is the one I just pulled together for it. And it's looking at how that we think our research, this article, all of it, is supposed to say that we believe the knowledge and values of prospective grandmothers influence the breastfeeding behaviors of adolescent mothers. Sometimes you will see this in a diagram like this. Sometimes you will see it written out. But it's talking about the relationship among the variables. So now we have a hypothesis. Providing instruction to prospective grandmothers increases the incidence of breastfeeding among adolescent mothers. What's the independent variable? It is the instruction to prospective grandmothers. What's the dependent variable here? It's the incidence of breastfeeding among adolescent mothers. What's the population? It's the adolescent mothers, not the grandmothers. The grandmothers are part of the intervention. Remembering, we're measuring the behaviors of the adolescent mothers, not necessarily the behaviors of the grandmothers. So now we're looking at the need to operationalize. Yeah, all that hypothesis sounded great, but what does breastfeeding behaviors really mean? How do we measure that? So the independent variable, we're going to say, which is instruction to prospective grandmothers, a 2-hour class that provides formal values clarification and instruction on the benefits of breastfeeding to mothers and infants, taught to women who have adolescent daughters who are expecting their first child. Now, operationalizing the dependent variable, the number of adolescent mothers who continue to exclusively breastfeed by 6 weeks postpartum. Now, we haven't gotten into sampling techniques yet, so I'm not going to distinguish between sample and population at this point in time. But we're going to operationalize the population here, because pregnant teens, whoa, that's a big population. That's pretty vague. I'm not sure exactly when adolescence begins and ends, so we got to distinguish that. We're going to say it's pregnant females aged 12 to 17 years who are expecting their first child. Well, there's lots of other things out there that influence whether a person breastfeeds or not, other than just their mother. So these are all the extraneous variables. Exactly how old is the teen mother? Is she 12? Is she 13, 14, 17? Exactly. It may make a difference. A 12-year-old may react very differently to all of this than a 17-year-old. The age of the grandmother, the financial status of the family, the education of the grandmother, and her personal experience with breastfeeding. Did she breastfeed or did she bottle feed? The living arrangements. Does the teen live with her mother? The teen's school and work obligations. The attitudes and beliefs of the father of the baby. The relationship with the father of the baby. And role models in the community. The researcher has to decide, are we going to measure these and report them in the literature? Is that what we're going to do to control for these extraneous variables? Are we going to just disregard them because we don't think they're that important? That's probably not the right answer. Are we going to control for them by saying we are just going to work with women, teens who do not have a relationship with the father of the baby at this point in time, excluding the people who do have a relationship with the father of the baby. Remember, that's the homogeneity stuff that we talked about. All right, for this study, we've decided that school and work obligations are important enough that we want to move that out of the realm of being an extraneous variable and make it an independent variable. We're going to formalize that and measure it and include it in all our statistical analysis. So guess what we got to do next? We're going to have to operationalize and include an operational definition of what school and work obligations are. And the next thing we have to do is write a hypothesis, a second hypothesis. The school and work obligations of an adolescent mother influence the incidence of breastfeeding. That would be your second research hypothesis. Finally, we need to address assumptions of this research. Well, some of the obvious ones, this is not an all-inclusive list, but some of them are that prospective grandmothers can influence the breastfeeding behaviors of their expectant teen daughters. The second one we alluded to earlier, teens between the ages of 12 and 17 respond similarly to the influence of their mothers in terms of breastfeeding. And a single values clarification and educational intervention can change the attitudes and beliefs of prospective grandmothers. All of these are assumptions. We don't have research backing these statements at this point in time. So we as researchers are assuming these things as we are designing our study.